Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I give some examples of delusions as they might be seen by mental health counselors in their work? This is a good question. There's a lot of confusion about delusions and when something rises to the level of delusional. So let's start with what is a delusion. So delusion is a fixed false belief that doesn't change in light of conflicting evidence. And I like to think of this as something that happens over time, like this failure to change is something we see over time, as opposed to in the moment. So for example, if somebody has a belief that's clearly false and new evidence is introduced, I wouldn't expect their minds to be changed right away. It would take time. There'd be a process where they look at the evidence that was introduced and maybe look at more evidence, but eventually they might change their mind. It's really about an openness to believe what is true. Now, sometimes delusions get confused with hallucinations. Now, hallucinations are a separate construct. This is when somebody sees something that other people can't see, or hears something other people can't hear, or otherwise senses something that other people cannot sense. Oftentimes, delusions and hallucinations go together, like in certain disorders like schizophrenia. That's common, but they don't necessarily have to appear together. Also, sometimes hallucinations reinforce the delusion, so they're consistent with the delusion, and other times they're not. Now, we know that delusions are consistent with the concept of psychosis, a break from reality. And when someone is psychotic, 65% of the time, we would see that delusions are there. We see psychosis and therefore oftentimes delusions in many disorders. I mentioned schizophrenia. We also see delusions sometimes with schizoaffective disorder, schizophreniform disorder, delusional disorder, major depressive disorder, and bipolar disorder. There's actually a few other disorders as well that could potentially have delusions. Now, when trying to assess delusions, it's important to be careful. Delusions appear on a continuum, or potential delusional behavior appears on a continuum. So you have to look at the false belief and somebody's willingness to change that belief. Do they totally believe the false belief? Are they open to believing? I mentioned that before. How pervasive are the delusions? Is the delusion something that just affects the individual once in a while? It doesn't seem to be a big deal. Or is it something that's more of an everyday occurrence? Spending a lot of time thinking about the delusion, making behaviors based on the delusion. We also want to see their commitment to the belief. Are they taking extra steps that could potentially be dangerous based on the false belief? So not all false beliefs mean that there are delusions. Sometimes a false belief has never been challenged. Sometimes it's been ineffectively challenged. Sometimes the evidence that contradicts a false belief isn't understood. But usually if we're talking about something that is delusional, we will see a pattern. Now, another question I get asked often about this is around conspiracy theories. If somebody believes in a conspiracy theory, is that a delusion? Well, the answer is it depends. All the same assessment practices would have to be employed to determine that. Some people who believe in conspiracy theories are not delusional. Some are. That's why careful assessment is really important. We can't jump to conclusions and say if somebody has a false belief, automatically they're delusional. It's important to remember, too, that sometimes with conspiracy theories, some conspiracy theories have turned out to be true. So, again, a lot of caution, and we have to be careful in assessment. Now, a lot of times when we think about delusions, we think about the term paranoia. So somebody being afraid that others are out to get them. And this is a fairly common type of delusion. About 80% of delusions involve some persecutory paranoid component. But paranoia is actually normal. We see mild paranoia, which can just be fears that everybody has, all the way up to severe paranoia. And this would be more in line with some of these conspiracy theories, for example. We know that severe paranoia can be caused by trauma, bullying, and social exclusion. And there's various theories that really paranoia is there to relieve stress, to protect the sense of self. So when somebody is blaming others, that gives them control and helps them to get oriented. So what are some of the types of delusions? What are some examples of delusions that I've seen or that we see in the research literature? Well, there are many different types of delusions, and we see many ways to divide them. For example, you could think of delusions as mood congruent or mood incongruent. That's one way we can think of them. So if somebody is manic, for instance, like with bipolar disorder, and they have a delusion that they're going to go to a casino and definitely win millions of dollars, that's mood congruent. Winning millions of dollars is congruent with mania. We can also see delusions that are incongruent with mood. So somebody is having that delusion, but they're depressed. That wouldn't be congruent. Now, in terms of the types, you could think of the types of delusions as persecutory. I mentioned that, and that's very common. We could think of other types like grandiose. We see ideas of reference, and we see when somebody believes that others are attracted to them, and a number of other types of delusions. I'm going to go over just a few of them here, these that I've mentioned specifically. So with the paranoid or persecutory delusions, we see these are negative. The person is worried that somebody's trying to inflict harm on them, that they're in some sort of danger, that they're threatened, or being abused and harassed. Some examples of these type of delusions would be if somebody believes the CIA is spying on them, or trying to hurt them with some sort of electronic device. For example, satellites, rays, thought control, planting cameras in the area. So if somebody comes into an office, for example, and they think that everything in your office is a camera that's looking at them, or they look up at the sky a lot and they are worried about satellites, or they believe they know where satellites are and what they're doing. That all kind of points to delusional behavior. Again, there's a lot of other elements that have to be considered, but those behaviors are certainly something I've seen that are consistent with some delusions. We also see similar harmful type delusions, like the CDC is trying to poison the population, or that vaccinations are there to control people's minds or poison people. We see delusions where somebody believes that everyone around them is staring at them, judging them, or out to get them. So it's not always necessarily the government in a conspiracy theory. It can also be just somebody, when they come in to see a counselor and they talk about how on the way to see the counselor, every other car on the road, all the drivers were looking at them and judging them for being bad in some way. So it doesn't have to be kind of this conspiracy level type enterprise. It can be something local. Now, oftentimes I have found, however, that when it is related to the government, it's usually the federal government that's involved in the delusion, not a local government. For example, I haven't seen many cases where somebody says a city council is out to get them, or a mayor is out to get them. It's usually a federal organization like the CIA, the FBI, or the IRS. And we also see with the government type delusions that they're not new, meaning usually people aren't saying that the spying behavior or the controlling behavior, harmful behavior, is new, but rather part of a long-time behavior by the government. So if we look at delusions like these and kind of move them down a level, so they're not quite delusional, but they're just false beliefs that somebody is somewhat committed to, we kind of move into the area in one way of personality disorders. So not all delusions, when minimized, would be indicative of personality disorders, but some would be. And when I think of these kind of government conspiracy type delusions, and I move them down from delusional behavior, we usually think of something like paranoid personality disorder. So that would be kind of a lesser version of those type of delusions. Now looking at something like grandiose, we see grandiose delusions. Somebody believes they're a king, queen, prince, princess, some sort of deity, or somebody selected by a deity to accomplish something important. We also see that somebody could think they're a wealthy business person when they're not, or that they're a celebrity, or they're going to be a celebrity shortly, when that doesn't seem likely. Also that they know people that are very important, and usually this is, again, a lot of people, and they believe they know them very well. Or sometimes an individual might believe that they're in fact an alien. And this could be a grandiose delusion if the alien is special and that helps them in some way, or it could be persecutory, that they're an alien and the government is out to get them. If we move down from this delusion to something that's not delusional, we would end up maybe with something like narcissistic personality disorder, where there's grandiosity, but it doesn't rise to a delusional level. So moving down the list to the next type of delusion, we see the idea of reference. And this one can be a little bit tricky because the idea of reference is actually one of the symptom criteria for schizotypal personality disorder. But here I'm talking about an idea of reference that rises to the delusional level. So this would be where somebody believes that outside events that aren't related to them are related to them. So for example, somebody could say that they thought about it raining and that caused the rain. Or they could believe that a natural disaster that happens in a faraway country they caused because they had negative thoughts. So again, all these different outside external occurrences have personal significance for that individual, and that can rise to a delusional level. Now, when it's not quite a delusional level, that's when we start thinking of a disorder like schizotypal personality disorder. Again, idea of reference is a symptom criterion for that disorder. The last type of delusion I'll cover here is the delusion of attraction. I haven't seen this too much, but it is out there. I wouldn't think of it as nearly as common as grandiose or the paranoid types of delusions. But with this type of delusion, somebody believes that a celebrity or even people that aren't celebrities are really attracted to them, and that they're sending them messages to demonstrate their attraction in movies, in television, through telepathy, or in other ways. So in a sense, it's like grandiose, but in another sense it's a little bit like histrionic personality disorder, where somebody's trying to be the center of attention and somebody believes that other people really like them more than they do, or the relationships are more intimate than they really are. But of course at the delusional level, the commitment and the pervasiveness of the belief is much more extensive than what we see with histrionic personality disorder. So here's just a few types, a few examples of delusions. There are other types of delusions as well. Again, careful assessment is really the key. In terms of understanding the structure of delusions, there's also really a lot of information about this, but just really briefly, it's important to remember that usually we see a central delusion or a few key delusions, and then a number of smaller peripheral delusions that really almost seem like they're just there to support the main delusions. So somebody has to create new delusions or believe in additional false beliefs to support that main false belief. So those delusions, those smaller delusions, just become necessary. So that's fairly common. It's unusual to see just one primary delusion and no other delusions at all. It can happen, but that's relatively unusual. Now, how about treatment options? So I went over many examples of delusions, but is there any way to treat delusions? Can somebody be talked out of a delusion? Well, we know that that's actually fairly difficult, but there are different treatment strategies that have been used, and they have varying levels of effectiveness. We see several models, including someone trying to build a very good therapeutic alliance first, and that's, I think, usually a good tactic. Then seeking existing doubt, so trying to find an area where somebody has doubts about the delusions, so looking for cracks in the delusions, and then helping somebody to generate and test alternate theories or explanations for the delusion. So I've seen strategies like this work, but sometimes they don't work. Sometimes a delusion is so firmly in place that all new information simply makes the delusion stronger, or the new information is ignored. And certain bits of information that may reinforce the delusion, someone will pay attention to just those. So for example, if a client's in assessment and they're asking you questions as the counselor, and they say, well, tell me why you want to be a counselor. You might say, well, I like to help people to get their symptoms eliminated or reduced. I like to help people reach their goals. I enjoy empathizing with people, making a connection with people. I enjoy supervising. I also enjoy research. They might stop right there and say, research. You're into research. That means you want to study me, and I'm not going to tolerate that. That's what the government's been trying to do, and I'm not going to let you do that as well. So really ignoring all the information about empathy and trying to reduce symptoms and meet goals, and centering on just that one word, research. So that's an example of how sometimes as we add information, it's not always helpful. That doesn't mean that treatment strategies should be avoided, not at all. Treatment should certainly occur, and there are effective strategies, but you have to be careful and navigate these strategies. It's not always easy. You won't see a reduction in delusions, oftentimes anyway, immediately. And of course, sometimes you won't see a reduction at all. It really depends on the strength of the delusion, the mental disorder that could be leading to the psychosis, which is leading to the delusion, and how cyclic that disorder is. Something like bipolar disorder, where mania and depression tend to come and go in cycles. When somebody's not in an active phase, they might look at those delusions they once had and say, no, they're definitely not true. But if we see something more persistent, like schizophrenia, although that of course has phases too, somebody may believe even between the active phases that those delusions are still true. So the level of insight really varies depending on where the psychosis is coming from. When talking about delusions and the examples of delusions and treatment of delusions, of course this is a really interesting topic. I know a lot of people have different opinions about this. If you have an opinion you want to share, please put it in the comments section. As always, I appreciate those comments, and I look at those and see the different opinions and different takes and perspectives on these topics that I cover in these videos. I hope you found this video about delusions to be interesting. Thanks for watching.